Consumer surveys indicate that satisfaction with government services has fallen to an 8-year low. In fact, recent Gallup polls show that Americans continue to name dissatisfaction with government as the nation's second most important problem after the economy. Many government officials, moreover, are entirely aware of this dissatisfaction. Clearly, there's a huge gap between what the service state and provincial governments offer and companies like Amazon, eBay, Uber, and Airbnb offer. To provide the same seamless experience these companies do, a state government would need a robust digital platform offering the equivalent of a one-stop shop, making a range of functions available in a few clicks. Today, I'm speaking with Steve Hurst, Deloitte's digital government market offering leader, about the digital state and what steps the public sector needs to take to digitize the core. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hello, Heidi. Thanks for having me on.
Have you ever tried to renew car registration? Pay your property taxes? No. How long will it take you to get a permit? And I can see myself, Steve, being in line more than online. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation because I think you're going to prove us wrong in a lot of these areas. So let's start by defining the terms. When we say digital state, what exactly do we mean?
So when we talk about the digital state, as in digital state government, we're really describing a state government that has fully embraced the digital options at its disposal for interacting with its constituents. And that can be through its .gov web portal, through apps. It can just be through text, right, social media. So it's really the digital state. That's where you go to get your government stuff done, but online, not inline.
I want to read from your recently co-authored publication for Deloitte on delivering the digital state. You mentioned customers would gain an account-like experience with their government. Information and electronic artifacts would be provided once and shared across agencies as required and as allowed by the customer while adhering to privacy statutes. This is a de facto standard for most commercial organizations, and again, customers have come to expect it. Let's talk about this tension, though, between the level of service we get from private sector and the level of service we get from other government agencies. Do you think it's realistic that government should behave like an Amazon and Uber?
So the short answer is yes, it is a realistic expectation, and it's not actually as hard as it sounds. So let me see if I can convince you on that point. Right?
I'm already, you heard me already going, I don't think so.
Right. So let's start here. Right? It is a fact that Amazon and Uber, Airbnb, all those companies you mentioned, and state governments are all in the same peer group today when it comes to consumers' expectations for digital services. So government's not getting like a mulligan on this. People expect the same standard of digital services across all these sectors. So we're in that peer group. And I'd say, if that sounds daunting, how can we be as good as Amazon? Right? I think the good news is that keeping up with that peer group, it doesn't mean you have to be Amazon. But what it does mean is you do need to think like Amazon. And that really means taking a human-centered design approach to your services. And this is what commercial organizations do. It really means you need to get out into the field, understand your constituents' needs and expectations. Don't guess what they want. Go and observe it firsthand. Then you design your services to address those needs, and then you get back out in the field and see how well it's going. And then you keep repeating around that loop, and that's the iteration part that's so important.
There are a lot of benefits for the government to treat its customers like Amazon and Uber. It's very hard for me to imagine that they could be brought through a customer journey based on a lot of intel. There's also this kind of elephant in the room, which is risk. So let's talk about the potential risks in the context of account-like experiences.
There's probably two flavors of risk. There's sort of risk of failure. I think that's very solvable. The other inherent risk, though, in delivering these more sophisticated services is security. It's about security, it's about privacy, it's about control of your data and how that data is getting used. When we're talking about a more personalized, more streamlined service, that may require you to share some of your personal information. So, for example, in the retail world, we all set up accounts with online retail stores, and we share our mailing address, and we share our credit card information. And, that's a calculated risk that we're willing to take because we just really love that one-click purchase experience right at the end. So, people are pretty familiar with that risk sort of value trade-off in the commercial world. Now, for government, the stakes are a lot higher because you may be dealing with information that's very closely associated with your identity. So your social security number, your driver license, and you want to improve the DMV experience, for example, you're going to be exchanging that data. So there's certainly more at risk for the customer. I think that risk-value trade-off is pretty well understood within the discrete functions of government, like DMV or human services or tax filing. We see those services are online today in many states, and people are sharing personal information, and in return, they're getting the convenience of that service. But I think what is changing now, and you alluded to this, is if we're kind of taking that up a level now, and we're starting to explore this idea of having a single consolidated account with the state. And that's a level of sort of sharing of data that goes much, much further beyond what's been done today. And that certainly requires a higher degree of trust in the state, right, in return for the improved and streamlined services that you're going to get. And so there's definitely more risk involved. It's clearly incumbent on the states to have a very robust security in place. And I think it's also pretty widely understood that you need to offer that kind of service improvement on an opt-in basis. So let people choose it, kind of know what they're getting in for, don't mandate it, and then just really work on building that trust and demonstrating the value. I think, let's see how this plays out over the next few years.
Let's talk a little bit about healthcare gov. From a human design perspective, there was a first pass, and I think you have intel on a second pass, again, to try to iterate how difficult this really is.
I think it's a very well understood case study now in technology and government. And really, I think a lot of the advances, or certainly the acceleration in adoption of agile delivery technique and combined with human-centered design in government certainly can be traced back to the challenges that the federal government had rolling out healthcare.gov. And the recovery from the initial troubled implementation was taking an agile development approach. So that means taking small chunks of functionality and getting those built and delivered and out in the field and tested quickly, and taking a human-centered design approach to the whole experience there. And it had this sort of a wonderful effect of becoming a bit of a lightning rod to attract that kind of thinking into government. And then the message started to sort of filter down to the states and cities as well. So I think where we are today is we're very much sort of benefiting from that collective experience now. And I think we're in a much stronger position to be more successful in embracing technology in government and creating a more human-centered experience for people interacting with government.
Let's jump on that a little bit further, Steve. This idea of, or like the analogy for government of bouncing around different websites to accomplish a task. From the user standpoint, we're confused. Why do I have to go to my senator for this? And why do I have to go over here for my property taxes? How difficult this is to accomplish when most of us are so used to this kind of single sign-in experience.
If you had to boil it down to one thing, I think it's silos and a siloed organization. Historically, that's what government has looked like. I think a way to think about how you sort of move beyond that, right, and how you start to solve for that issue is to step back and look at this fundamentally as a design issue, right? So systems do what they're designed to do, right? And this government system was not designed for seamless customer service. It was really designed for agency efficiency and agency effectiveness, right? And that's why we have these somewhat autonomous and siloed agencies. And so what we need to do is redesign that system, and redesign it so that it's configured to deliver a more seamless customer experience. And I think that's sort of effectively what leading governments are doing now. They're redesigning their own government. But I think there's a couple of aspects of that. There's sort of front stage, if you like what the public sees and experiences, and you're redesigning that. And then there's the backstage, which is everything else that's going on in the organization that actually enables you to deliver the service. And we're certainly seeing a lot of front stage redesign, notwithstanding your experience.
Well, I'm moving, by the way, based on your paper, and I'm moving to Michigan. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a lot of, if you look around, it is actually I think it's quite encouraging if you just click around some of the state portals. States are generally doing a pretty good job of redesigning that .gov portal and being its digital face to the public, and they're redesigning it to organize the services really around the needs of the constituent and get away from that internal agency structure so that you don't have to understand the internal structure anymore. And that's starting to offer that more seamless and consistent experience that we were talking about, and it helps you get to the answers that you're looking for. But you can only really achieve so much before you've got to get behind the curtain, right? Get backstage and start making the changes in the organization, right? So, which actually help you deliver that more seamless service. And that's, I think, historically always been a lot harder in government. Technology certainly plays a big role here. So with better connected technologies, you can share information across the agencies, you can coordinate service delivery, right? And that's going to help you improve customer experience. And we're certainly seeing that in a lot of states. A lot of states are working on this, like Michigan, Ohio, Texas, Tennessee, others. They're implementing these enterprise technologies across the organization, and they're sort of forging these connections. They're building connections across those agency silos. I think also that redesign, that backstage redesign, if you like, it's not just about technology. You also really need to look at the role that leadership and governance plays. For me, it starts with this question, so who in the organization, who's actually accountable for delivering that end-to-end customer experience that we know our constituents want, right? So who's on point to make that happen? We were comparing back to commercial organizations a few moments ago. Well, in a commercial organization, you have a chief marketing officer, which is a pretty senior role in the organization, and they are on point to make that happen. And that's just not a position that has existed in government. So we have to figure out how to fill that void. States are certainly doing that. You see state CIOs often kind of playing a key role there, and maybe they have a chief digital officer in the CIO's office. Folks perhaps there's often a customer-focused leadership team somewhere in the governor's office. And so that group together is creating this nucleus of a leadership team that's starting to take point for customer experience in government. And I think that's a good start, but in most states there's still a real opportunity to strengthen that governance and leadership. And, in many ways, I think that's going to be a key determinant of success. Those states that they get that governance and leadership in place, they're the ones that will emerge as the real digital leaders, the Amazons of state government, if you like.
We're speaking with Steve Hurst, Managing Director in Deloitte's Consulting U.S. Public Sector, talking about his co-authored paper, Delivering the Digital State. You referenced the sizable challenges and where we're seeing states doing a really great job. We've got to look at costs. So your paper raises this issue of ROI, return on investment. How hard is it for government to make the case for investing in this?
I think in government, what you find is at the specific sort of use case level, you can often make a really strong case for investment in digital services. So I'll give you an example. State of Texas Office of Social Services sits in their Health and Human Services Commission. So they made a relatively modest investment in creating a mobile app for their clients, and it's called Your Texas Benefits. And it enables people to submit their human services verification documentation online, taking a picture of this documentation on a smartphone right through this mobile app, and then sending it into the office. And it's had this amazing impact on just reducing all the administrative burden and churn on the agency of sort of dealing with that function in person. And not only that, right, they're now interacting sort of back and forth with their constituents through these digital channels, and sometimes it's just through text. And even that alone has resulted in tens of millions in savings just in the postage costs. So you look at that, that's a very strong business case. And where it gets a bit more challenging, though, is to justify the expenditure. So one is when we're making those more enterprise level investments that we talked about. And I think the second area where it's still challenging to make the case for investment is really around that human-centered design, is spending a little bit more upfront to make that investment in perhaps it's the customer research that's required to really understand what your constituents want, right, and the field level testing. It's a modest investment, but that's something that's it's new territory for government.
Steve, at this point in our interview, we'd like to change things up a bit. Normally, we do a rapid-fire debate with our two guests. We have one today, and I'm so thoroughly enjoying the conversation. Our producers thought it might be fun to have you debate both sides, which is the burning question of costs. Having read your paper, it seems clear that there are a lot of reasons state leaders have for why they should not invest in new technologies. Namely, it's expensive. All right, so 30 seconds on the clock. First, tell us why cost could be high for taxpayers and why that's such a bad idea. Starting now.
So, firstly, back to that Uber and Amazon comparison, we totally understand why they're spending that money, but that's because they have to. They have to compete for their customers. We're a government, we're a monopoly, we simply can't justify spending that kind of money. So I think that's point one. Point two would be, some incremental investment is surely justified, but we just don't have a good track record of spending money. So better just to keep the funds flowing to the agencies and let them make their decisions.
And now the other side, Steve, why cost is not as high as we think and why taxpayers shouldn't be adversely affected, starting now.
Yeah, so this is not just about meeting your constituents' expectations. This is about improving the operations of government. So when people use digital services, they're reducing the administrative burden on the state, and this allows the agencies to focus their resources more effectively. So there is a strong business justification across the board for shifting to digital. And I think we agree, too, that the investment should be incremental. It should be guided by sort of clear insight into what people want. And we can live by those principles, and we can deliver the substantial benefits of digital government services.
Wow, that was really great. You are a good debater. Come back to the show anytime.
Okay, so I have to ask you, so which side of the argument was most convincing for you?
It's the latter. The cost is not as high as you think. And I think people are going to be really surprised about the really great examples that are already in play. So thank you for participating in our rapid fire portion. I want to encourage our listeners to read this paper, Delivering the Digital State. I think it's fascinating, Steve. References to Estonia of the nation rebuilding its entire IT system from scratch in 1991. Can you imagine?
I think there's quite a few state governments that would like that opportunity as well.
And then you look at these really beautiful executions, Michigan's MI login, where you have this single sign-in. You reference in the article the use, how many state employees and contractors and state applications. They really do build upon each other, and the customer's feedback is something that's so critical, but something that's so lovely when it works well. What are the kinds of questions I might want to be thinking about?
The discrete services that those government entities provide are different, right? And therefore the needs and expectations of the constituents are going to be a little bit different. So it all starts with really understanding your sort of inventory of services that you're providing, and then really getting into the minds of your constituents what it is that would most help them and meet their expectations in delivering those services. Cities have been making a lot of progress in that respect. And this started with the rollout of the 311 services, which was a phone-based service that started in the 90s. And that gave residents a single phone number for all non-emergency city services. In a way, this predated digital, but it was an early move to improve that customer experience and that help people navigate the complexity of their city government. The perennial challenge for cities really is there's less money at the municipal level. So in some respects, the federal government and then the state governments just have a little bit more latitude for investment, and cities have to be a bit more creative in perhaps reaching out to the private sector and trying to get a sort of a public-private partnership type arrangement in place.
What does the future look like for a digitized state?
The future is good. It's good, it's good for constituents and good for the state. I think we'll see three sort of parallel threads evolving here. So, and one absolutely speaks to this design point that we've been discussing. So we will see government services being redesigned from that constituent's perspective, and they'll be better. The services will be better. They'll be more intuitive. They'll be more proactive, reaching out to you, reminding you need to do things. They'll be more streamlined. It'll be that seamless end-to-end experience that we talked about. But there's more than that going on. Following commercial industries, we're going to see some interesting developments around the interaction style, how we interact with government. You're increasingly going to be able to have a natural language interaction, whether that's typed or spoken. And in a way, it's going to feel like you're working with the ultimate digital concierge who answers your questions, who thinks for you, organizes you, and gets you to the government services that you need. So I think that's a second area where we're going to see a lot of interesting development. Thirdly, we're just going to see more and more of the mechanics of government that just move into the digital space. So those physical artifacts we associate with government functions today, like a driver's license or your professional license or your passport, for example, or even a speeding ticket, right? These will all become digital artifacts, right? And we'll be interacting with those through digital channels. And we won't have to stand in line in the DMV. That's my prediction for the future.
I feel a lot more confidence having had this conversation with you. And for all of those that are working in public sector, we are lucky to have you working in this environment. Success in the digital age ultimately depends on how state governments execute human-centered design, digital identity, and data sharing across the enterprise. From a customer standpoint, for those of us used to using Amazon or Uber every day, this kind of innovation is commonplace. But for the public sector, the challenges are unique. It sounds like the most digitally adept state governments will imagine the future by meshing their business goals with user-centered experience design and a good understanding of current technologies. The key is to exploit good design, integrate current systems, and, as always the case, adapt quickly. I want to thank my guest today, Steve Hurst, co-author of Delivering the Digital State, for joining me on User Friendly.
Thanks, Heidi. It's been fun talking with you.